Good evening. It's Romania Black, and we're on episode 40 of Monster. I'm so excited. Yes, indeed. I poured myself a hot beverage. I've sat down this evening, and I'm ready to record episode 40. I'm really, really excited. It feels weird. Like, we're past the halfway point, and it felt like last episode, even though it ended with that cliffhanger of Carl and Tenma meeting up and getting that cryptic message, and there's all this stuff about frogs and more fairy tale elements, and Nina and Dieter are going off on their own, and Reichwein and Rudy are probably working together, and who knows what's going to be happening. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on. But I felt like for the first time in like the last month's worth of episodes, I could calm down a little bit. Now, watch this episode be absolutely ridiculous and we no longer have calm. But yeah, so Lunge's kind of hit a wall. I'm hoping Lunge researches Johan. That'd be great if he would, but it seems like he's not going to. And things are just kind of crazy. So I do have a couple comments before we start the episode. H Banana was talking about how if the storybook could also be referring to the split between East and West Germany, if that related to the monster, and then just being the idea that it split in half, and then it all came back together, right? They came back together, and did that create a bigger monster? And I don't know. I feel like you can do a lot with the symbolism in this story. You can do a lot, especially with the storybook. The storybook, you can just go all crazy with it. But I feel like there's a lot of options you can do. So that could be some of it. I don't know. And related to that, CR noted that the names in this Czechoslovakian book were in German, like Otto and Johann, and was Thomas one of them. They were German names in this Czech book. So I don't know what to make of that unless the author was from Germany or spent some time in Germany and then came back to the Czech Republic to make the book. I don't know. I didn't want to look up stuff on the author because it seemed like it would be a big old spoiler. So I didn't want to get crazy with that. But yeah. So I've been pretty excited every week for Monster, and this week is no exception. So I'm excited to see what's going to happen. I wanted to give a very quick shout out over to our philanthropy tier over on Patreon, to these wonderful people who have supported me in doing what I love, which is rambling about shows like these. So a special shout out to Edgar, to Dana, to Kiri, to Be Happy, to Alex Cornejo, to Shimoyama, to Truck, to Nameless Monster, to Natalia, Zaharia, Modern Amethyst, to Tyrone, to Anime Annie, to Eric, to Sunspots, to Translucent Men, to Anna, to Legatus, as well as Kuba Lutek. Yes, I think that's everybody. Y'all are right here. Thank you all so much for your support. I really, really am grateful. All of my love. So yeah, I'm not wasting more time. I took a little bit of time off between episodes 39 and this one. I watched like 37, 38, and 39 like back to back because I just couldn't wait. But then after 39, I was like, okay, Romania can breathe for a little bit, and then we'll dive into episode 40. I feel like every 10 episodes is like a milestone. It's like you've reached episode 10, now it's a milestone because the next one will be 50, and then 60, and then 70, and then we're practically over. So, insanity, right? Right? So, we're not going to waste any more time. We're going to dive right in, but I hope you all enjoy. We're going to start episode 40 of Monster. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's see what happens. I miss Grimmer already, but I'm hoping he stays in this series for a while because I freaking love him. I feel like such a bitch because at first, when he first turned around, I was like, wow, he's got a really great body. He's really hot. And then he turned around, I was like, oh no. But then the more you get to know him, I'm like, no, he's really hot. It's just the nose. The side profile with the nose throws you off a little bit because it's a big nose. But then the more you get to know him, I was like, no, you're actually really hot. Cool. I love Grimmer. I wanted him to stick around with Tenma because I wanted to ship them. It's like the first time I've ever had a ship in this series develop. We're 40 episodes in. This is like a record for Romania Black to go 40 episodes in a series before she develops a ship. And I was like, oh hey, Grimmer and Tenma could be a ship together, but no, alas, there's so much I wish they could have talked about because I'm like, you guys are on the same page looking for the same things. But I think that in another vein, it's better this way because Tenma can go on and do whatever Tenma's planning on doing and can go on and do whatever they're planning on doing. and Grimmer can do his investigations, and then maybe just like with Nina. Now, I don't think Nina and Dieter are going to be crossing the border into Prague because, one, I don't know if Nina has a passport, and even if she does, I don't think Dieter does. So I doubt that they're going to be doing that. But there's clearly, I feel like Grimmer's there on personal business, and we're going to talk about that with this episode, but I feel like Tenma's just going there, finding stuff out about Johann's mom and Nina's mom, and then going to piece back there across the border again. If he can get across the border. I mean, Grimmer, he had to have Grimmer's help to get across the border because his passport's fake. I'm like, is he going to be able to find Grimmer and get help to come back? Is he going to be stuck in Prague? I don't know. But I just don't know. So I'm very curious to see what is going to happen. So let's go through this episode because I was so distracted by Grimmer at first. I was like, hey, a hot person. A hot person doesn't seem like they're evil. This doesn't happen a lot in this series. Although Grimmer is fascinating. He is much more than meets the eye. And he's so intriguing to me because his character is not what it seems. And I feel like he's putting on a front or mini fronts, and I feel like there's stuff that's left unsaid. So I want to put Grimmer up here. We're going to put Grimmer up here. We don't know his first name. We just know his name is Grimmer. He's a freelance. We ought to put this on here. He is a freelance journalist, and I am going to say right now that he is the anti-Lunge. I feel like Grimmer is the polar opposite of Lunge in every shape of the world, in every shape of the word. He seems like he was obsessed with his kid. He seems like he is addicted to discovering the truth and following leads and being objective about it. I'm so curious about his character, and it feels like he's very personable. He's very like warm and easy, and he's very like just kind of easy to talk to, right? And he seems like he's easy to fool, but I feel like there's a lot more to him, right? So he just seems like a polar opposite of Lunge, which I'm super excited about to have. I feel like it's going to be interesting because Monster, we still have 34 episodes to go in the series. And so I feel like it could be a cool dynamic to introduce somebody like Grimmer at this point in the story, at the halfway point, and say, okay, this guy is going to make things complicated for Lunge. He's going to help Tenma out, but he's also going to be doing this. Like, I like the idea of kind of like what we're getting with Rudy and Reichwein, getting Grimmer thrown in to be someone else to help make the thing more complicated, right? And to help track Johann down. Although right now, Grimmer is not after Johann. He's out after information about Kinderheim 511 for reasons. But I feel like because he's after information about Kinderheim and he knows the cases about Tenma and he believes Tenma's innocent, I feel like he's going to be someone that's going to get connected to Johann somehow. I don't know. And the connection, the thing about him and Tenma, we're going to talk about that. Because at this point, I guess we should also bring up and talk about Tenma just a little bit. I was waiting to see what Tenma said about the doctor thing. And yeah, Tenma believes, we're going to put Tenma over here. Tenma is at Prague, seemingly to look for Johann and Nina's mom. All right. And then he also says he is not a doctor anymore. He's not a doctor anymore. And Tenma, it's like Tenma, this is the first horrific crime Tenma's committed, is that he says because he killed someone, he does not deserve the title of saving lives. I get a little frustrated with Tenma just a wee bit in this episode, and I'm kind of on the same page as Grimmer. By the end of it, when Grimmer's like, yeah, you killed a man, that's not good, but it doesn't define the entire rest of your existence. I feel like that's the thing too, because again, we talk about names in this series. We talk about names. We talk about how they define us and our identity. And for Tenma, the title of doctor has been something that has been associated with his agency, with his identity. He saves lives. So that's Tenma. He does only good things. And so he feels that now that he's shot someone, he doesn't know for sure if they're dead. I think that Roberto's dead. But if he's not, he's going to come back like damn Chucky, I feel like Tenma believes now that he shot Roberto, he no longer earns that title anymore. It's tainted. He can no longer be a doctor. It's like the monster has popped out of Tenma and erased the doctor, and now it's just a monster. It's how he views himself. And Grimmer's like, no, you can still be a doctor. You can still save people. Everyone has committed a sin. Everyone has done things they regret. And I feel like that was the one thing that made Grimmer be like, oh, in my head I'm going, Grimmer's killed a man, I'm sure. I'm sure he has. With all the talkies, I think Grimmer's killed someone too. But I feel like Grimmer believes, he's like, that's not going to stop me from being a journalist. It's not going to stop me from finding the truth and investigating and enacting what I believe is justice. So everybody's carrying sins with them. We just got to move forward, and you can't let that define you, right? I feel like it's like that with a lot of people. Like if you know somebody who's had a family member that's been involved with like drugs or something, and does that define who they are? Because I have a friend whose family member was involved with some drugs. They took some drugs that were illegal, and at the time they're like, I don't want that family member to be thought of as being a bad person because they got addicted to something that was bad. They're like, they're still a good person. They just did this bad thing. And I'm like, yeah, I get it, right? And so that's kind of like the case with Tenma. It's like, yeah, do we really define this person by this one act when we ourselves, one, have no clue what the circumstances behind those acts were? Because in Tenma's case, yeah, he shot Roberto, but he was doing it to defend his own life. So do we judge Tenma and say he's a murderer for the rest of his days? Now, you may be thinking, Romania, then why do you think Johan is a monster? And it's like, well, there's lots of things point to Johan. Johan sitting on a throne watching people kill each other. Johan hiring people to kill multiple families, supposedly. I'll give you supposedly. Johan, in the case of Junkers and him shooting Junkers, it was not self-defense. There was no reason for Johan to shoot Junkers except he'd shot him in the face 3 times. There was no reason. Junkers was asking him to spare his life, and it didn't look like he had a weapon to fight back at all. So really, in that situation, I'm like, in Richard's case, he led Richard to kill himself, supposedly. So, I mean, based on what we know and the context clues we have, Johan has done a lot of really bad things. And what's worse is that Johan has been very complicit in some very bad things happening. That's what, to me, Tenma has actively strived to help people. It's just he has gone after Johan, which you can say is bad, and he has shot Roberto, but he's been doing a lot of good things like saving people. He was trying to save people and get out of the library. Johan didn't do a damn thing except stand on that stage. So I'm like, Johan was fully okay with these people all dying, and I'm like, okay. But anyway, so let's get back to this episode here where it gets the messages. We still don't know about the 3 frogs, what that means about the 3 frogs and how that goes. And then we get the introduction, right? We get all of that. Okay. And so then we cut to the kid getting his... Anytime I see a random shoe lying around, if you guys ever traveled somewhere and you just see a shoe lying around, it always bugs me because I'm like, people, even though Grimmer tells the boy, he's like, you don't need shoes to walk. I'm like, I always feel like that's the creepiest thing because it's like, as a society, we all, at least, in U.S. society, you wear shoes. You have to wear shoes to go anywhere. So whenever I see just a shoe sitting there, and especially one shoe by itself, I'm like, that is so creepy. Why did somebody leave that behind? They need that. So, so seeing that one shoe when we start out the episode, I'm like, why is that just sitting there? That's creepy. And then these kids being jerks and taking these kids' shoes and kicking them around, right? And that sucks. I feel bad for that kid that he gets his shoe taken away and getting kicked around by these bullies. Like, that's not fair, It's not cool at all. And that's where Grimmer sees the kid getting beat up from above, right? Okay, so he's looking at these books about Prague. And they say, how is it going, Mr. Grimmer? Did you find the material you were looking for? And he's like, after the unification of East and West Germany, the institution's works completely changed. So there was a lot. I was trying to figure out who this guy was, and his perfect ass was throwing me off. So I was like, he's meeting all my standards. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and he's freakishly tall. He's checked off all 3 of my boxes. So I was like, who are you? And then, okay, so I lost track of a lot that was being talked about in this episode. So let's say East and West Germany, when they united back together, the institution works changed. I'm guessing how they collected and stored materials changed. That seems like maybe what they're referring to. This guy with the frog face, is he one of the three frogs? Probably not. And then he says, I'm sorry for causing you so much trouble, Director Galbraith. So we're going to put it out here just by Director Galbraith. We're just going to put him here as this man is looking at the materials. And so he says, it's rare for this much to be left. Yeah, since the Berlin Wall was destroyed, the dangerous material in the East has been disappearing. Okay, so there's been note that Eastern documents are disappearing. And he says dangerous materials. But usually, things that are sometimes dangerous information are often very enlightening information. And so for Grimmer, he's like, there is a part of history that is being erased. And I think that's an interesting tie to Johann, right? Because there's this idea that Johann, he does not want to exist, right? Johann's big thing is he's like, oh, I don't exist. Leave no trace of me. And I think that's an interesting tie-in to the idea of the Eastern documents that are dangerous disappearing. So out of sight, out of mind, you can't be harmed by something that doesn't exist, right? So he makes that comment and then makes note that the only thing for certain is that there were cases of child abuse in East German orphanages. Right? When he turned around the first time, his nose and his bangs threw me off. But the more we got to see him from like the front side profile, I'm like, no, I like Grimmer. And Grimmer's personality won me over. I'm like, Grimmer's like, he's got a 7 face and a 10 body, but his personality is a 12. So it all balances out, right? I was like, okay, cool. So there's the idea that there was child abuse in East German orphanages. Okay, the only thing for certain is there were cases that we can track from that. Okay. And so then from there, he said it's still hard to find materials to even prove that. He's an interesting character because he smiles a lot. He smiles and like seems so cordial and congenial. And I'm like, you're hiding so much, Grimmer, and I want to know what you're hiding, right? He's like, it's hard to find materials to prove such things. And the man's like, sure, yeah. The orphanages were normally under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Public Welfare. Okay, so he said that normally it was the Ministry of Public Welfare. And we start to go back to a lot of stuff that it's been a hot second since we've talked about Kinderheim. So this was almost like a review to be like, hey, remember all this stuff that came out like 20 episodes ago? The problem was for children whose parents... Okay, so there's a big old list here of children whose parents... And there's one word here that stands out. Okay, so the problem was for children whose parents were criminals, anarchists, spies, gonna bring that one up here, and illegal immigrants. Okay, so and illegal immigrants. Okay. And those with no influence. That probably is the most terrifying one of all. The fact that if you just had no influence, if you were just some random common kid that just they picked up off the streets and you didn't have any family influence politically, they were just like, chuck you into these orphanages. That's terrifying, right? Like it does make sense, like if parents are arrested for like being criminals, anarchists, if they were illegal immigrants, if they're spies, they want to separate the kids from their parents because their parents have been arrested and are being charged with something, right? And they're going to face trial. But for the no influence, it's just you could pick a kid up off the street and you didn't know who they were, chuck them away. The reason I say spy is my theory is that Grimmer's kid was maybe taken from him and chucked into Kinderheim and died there. And that's why he's so hell-bent on investigating. Because maybe he found a lead that led him to Kinderheim 511 and he's like, I want to know more because my son died there. Because he says he was a spy. So perhaps, I don't know. We've got to check it out. Those children were cared for at Kinderheim, which was under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. So these kids that were all children in this situation went to Kinderheim, which was from the Ministry of Internal Affairs. So he basically is establishing that there were two different types of orphanages that people went to. They were all wrought with cases of abuse, but for the most part, the Ministry of Public Welfare watched over the kids that were in the East German orphanages, like the one that Nina went to. But the one that Johann went to was Kinderheim. So that's interesting. I'm wondering if Johann was a case of no influence. If that was it. If there was, because we don't know anything about his mom yet, but I wonder if he just didn't have any influence and that's why he ended up there, and he was a boy. So he says, I want to know how far the abuse and brainwashing that occurred at that special orphanage went. He seems very like he's just so casual and calm, but I'm like, there's like a quiet fury brewing under the surface, right? And so we have established that Grimmer believes that there was brainwashing and abuse at that facility. And he wants to know what the deal is, right? What's the deal? I mean, could Dieter be his son? I don't think so, but it'd be funny if Dieter was his kid. I want to know exactly what took place inside that orphanage. I don't know. And this man that's like, Galbraith is just like, this seems like a grim topic for you to research, Grimmer. You know, he's like, thoroughly, huh? He's like, that seems dangerous. It's quite an investigation you're undertaking. The government employees are probably covering for each other, or at least they won't rat each other's out. So Breckert kind of says, or Galbraith says, I don't know how much info you're going to get from the government employees because they're probably going to cover for each other and not narc on anybody because they want to keep their own skin safe. And I feel like Grimmer's taking that into account. He's like, that's right, yeah. Including a certain Mr. Shunua who's employed here at the library, right? So he already knows that a man there is involved. He's like, Shunua. He's like, he was an educator at 62 Kinderheim. So we know there's Kinderheim 511, which is where Johann was. And this Shunua was at 62 Kinderheim. I find it interesting that Shunua and Schubert are similar, but again, it'd be like Smith and Smith Peters. It's like they're not the same name. They just happen to have the same beginning sounds. And so he's like, I asked him for an interview, but he declined. Imagine that. And so he's like, you should keep a lookout. Before the unification, he might have participated in child abuse. I love that he just is so dead-eyed and very serious. And he's like, hey, just so you know, this man that you work under, he could have abused kids. Just so you know. Like you should watch out for that. And the guy's like, uh-huh. And I feel like, again, he's like, oh, do you care if I make copies of these books? Sure, go right ahead. I thought for a second he was making copies of the entire book, but no, he's just making copies of parts of it. But yeah, I feel like his kid could have been at one of those orphanages and died there. He's like, you're a journalist from West Germany, aren't you? And so he's like, no, I'm from this side. So they ask if he's from West Germany, and he says no. The way that he says certain things, he's a good journalist, first of all. You can tell, because he knows the certain way to spin things and answer questions, and he knows little tactics to get people to say what it... Like, rhetorically, Grimmer is fascinating, because I'm like, everything Grimmer does, I'm like, oh, that's a reason. There's a reason for that. You're doing that for a reason. He says no. Like, the fact that he says, I'm from this side, instantly connects with Galbraith to say, no, I'm one of you. I worked for West Germany, sure, but I'm from this side. I'm on the same side as you, right? Are we good there? Do you know what I'm saying? He says, I worked at a paper in Leipzig. And he says, I would never have thought a protector of human rights would be from there. It feels like such like a shady read of the East Side. Like, who knew that somebody from the East Side would be for human rights? Am I right, man? Like, but then he kind of like throws this backhanded compliment right back to him. He goes, oh, well. He's like, oh, well, back then I flew all over the world as a correspondent. So he's like, I'm kind of worldly, kind of a big deal. So he says that he's a world correspondent. But not only that, not just a correspondent, right? He also says that as he's copying the books, you can't see his eyes. He's just sitting there smiling. I got missions from the government. Do you get it? I was a spy. And he says it so open-minded, do you get it? I was a spy for the government. Now, is that true or not? We don't know. The thing about Grimmer is, he tells the one guy at the very end, he said it was his first time in Prague. I'm like, was it? Are you lying? The thing about Grimmer is he's so good at being a rhetorician. He's so good at saying the right thing to the right people. But at the same time, there's little things he says that you're like, is it true? Is it not true? Because you're like, he says he was a world correspondent and he worked for the government as a spy. And it's like, well, is that true? When he offers the guy the money at the train station, the guy's like, you just got robbed. He's like, I was tricked? Did he know? Did he not know? It's like, you want to suspect that he knew he was getting tricked. He was just being nice because that's just the type of person he is. But it's so hard to read him because you're not sure if he's being entirely truthful or not. It's fascinating. And so then he goes outside and sees, he's like, it's full of papers I've collected throughout Germany. Okay, so his bag is supposedly, we'll say the bag is full of papers. Which he does get outside of the damn bottle of wine and the charcuterie board that he carries with him for his picnics. He does, a sophisticated man. I'm sorry, a tall blonde man that carries around charcuterie boards and wine ready for picnics at any given moment. Sign me up. But yeah, I'm just like, okay, so he's just walking around with all this documentation that he's carried with him. I'd be afraid somebody would try to light that bag on fire. He's like, oh, I expect a great article from you. Where are you off to now? And he's like, oh, I'm going to Prague. Look at me with my toothless grin. And so he goes on his way, and that's when he sees the kid. And his face is really expression, full of emotion, because when he sees the kid, his face drops, right? He seems cheerful, but then his face drops. And he's like, so they ended up taking your shoes. He's a tall guy, right? He's a pretty tall man in this story. And then he gives the shoes to the kid and says, people can live without shoes. We're all born barefoot anyway. Those who bully others and take away their shoes are scum. His face dropped, he's all happy-go-lucky and gives him, he's like, yeah, those bullies, they're scum. In that moment, it's establishing that he has this optimism, but a very strong sense of justice. He knows exactly what he can see. It's people that bully others and that are mean to them and do things like that, they're scum. And he tells the boy, he says, you shouldn't let losers like them make you cry. And being very serious, he's like, look, I don't need shoes. I'm fine. You'll be okay. Right? It's a very stern but very interesting way that he kind of tells that kid. And I like when he first talked to the kid, he got down on his level. You could tell he's been around kids before. Again, I do think he has a son. I do think his son's died. I do think that his son's death is what is motivating him to find this information out. But I want to know more. I want to know so much more about Grimmer. And then the kid gives him the shoe back. And he's like, oh, look at you. He's like, can't walk in them, can you? So then we go to the train station, right? And that's where he meets the guy that gives him the thing about the woman about the sister from Vienna. And asks him for the money, right? And Grimmer looks so sincere. He just has this very sincere look on his face. Yeah, sure, okay. Yep, what a story, yeah. And there are little bits of things that he says throughout that lead me to believe he knew the man was lying. And is the man lying? That's kind of the crazy thing about this is we don't ever find out if that man was lying about his sister. The thing that's so heartbreaking kind of is the whole time I was like, oh yeah, that guy's lying. I don't know. We don't know. I'm just like that old man that comes up to him, at the end where he's like, that guy just scammed you out of money. And the thing is, I've seen people do that. And so that instantly made me think this guy was lying, and saying that he could only, and all the excuses he made make it sound suspicious, right? But Grimmer's thing is Grimmer, chooses to believe in people. That's the thing. Grimmer, he chooses He chooses to believe in the best of people. Like until he's proven otherwise. I'm going to put that on here. Until proven otherwise. So here's the thing. Like the kids that were bullying the little boy, he saw them bullying him. So he instantly had a prejudice against him. He's like, no, those kids are scum. They were doing something really wrong. Here's your shoes. I trust in you. I have faith in you, kid. The man that came up, yeah, he could have been lying, but we don't know. And Grimmer doesn't know. So Grimmer chose to believe in that he was the best of himself and said, I'm going to trust that you're telling the truth. Here's some money. Here's a $500 note. Just go and help your sister. And I'm going to trust you to do the right thing. And then the man that came up was like, oh, people scam you out of money here all the time. And Grimmer's like, was I tricked? And that's the thing. It's almost like him asking that question, was I tricked, is like a question to us, the audience, asking us to answer it for him. Like, was he tricked or not? And the thing is, we don't know. And we'll never know. It's like a, if a tree falls in the wood, does it make a sound? The answer is yes. But it's one of those questions of, hypothetically, if you don't really know the answer, can you say that you do without knowing for sure? I feel like he's, in that moment, Grimmer was saying, I don't know. I'm going to choose to believe in people until I'm proven wrong. And that's kind of why, he follows Tenma. He's like, I've seen these cases over and over again. You're probably, I believe you're innocent. Prove me wrong. And then Tenma opens up to him about shooting the man and not being a doctor. And to Grimmer, that's proof that Tenma is innocent and that he actually is a good person because he's so open and honest about his worries and his fears. He's like, no, you're a doctor. You are. You're just going through a bad place right now. Mm-hmm. But when he approaches the director at the end, he knows the director was around when all this bad stuff was happening and did nothing. So to him, that's the proof that he's wrong. He's like, you've been proven wrong. Now I want answers. That's such a fascinating scene. And I love it. And obviously, this guy's like, I was just going to see my sister. Because when Grimmer's like, oh, we should get the police. He's like, oh, no, I've already tried that. He, gives that excuse. And Grimmer's like, oh, okay. Like Grimmer, he tries to give all these different, opportunities for this man. But then he gives him, and then the guy even asks for his address. And he's like, oh, no worries. Which, when he says no worries, no address, that makes me believe that Grimmer is kind of like Tenma. He doesn't have an address. He's on a mission. He's going from place to place. He doesn't necessarily have a home. He's just going, right? And then that's when the man says, you gave your money to him so easily. They're always looking for money. And then him asking the audience, was I tricked? We can't answer that question for him because we don't know. We never see that man again. And we don't see any gesture on the man's face that suggests he's like, hey, what a sucker. We don't see anything like that. So for all we know, yeah, he could go send that to his sister. And we're the assholes. That's the thing about it. Grimmer's kind of asking the question, how can we judge people that we know nothing about? Right? Oh my God. I'm absolutely in love. And then I feel like him getting on I feel like Grimmer is like, he gets on the train, but I'm like, you could move that bag to the side. But if it's for him and Tenma to have a fateful meeting, I'm all here for it. And then Grimmer is looking for the cart that he's in. He's like, oh yes. And he knows who he is because he followed his cases. Where are you headed? And he's like, oh, Prague. And the thing that's so interesting is that I said that he's like the anti-Lunge, but Grimmer is similar to Lunge in that you cannot read what they're thinking from their expressions. It's just Lunge has a very serious deadpan expression that's hard to read, and Grimmer looks like he's happy all the time. We know he's not happy all the time, but that makes his expression quite unreadable. You're just like, oh, you're one of those people that you just can't get a read on him. It's so interesting. And then they're on the train and their passports get checked. And so he says a few things. Like in 1982, he was in Japan, right? 1982, he was in Japan in Akibara. I don't know from the beginning of the series when Tenma came over here from Japan and where Tenma was from. I don't think it was Akibara. But he tries to sing the song and then Tenma corrects him on what the song title was. Now, again, the question is, did Grimmer actually know the song and he was just trying to, like, you know, spring conversation up between him and Tenma? Possibly. Like, I feel like he says, what does he say? There's many gadgets and robots. Because he says it was 1982, I went to Akibara. The song was possible. He says there was lots of gadgets and technology there. Which I'm like, if you were a spy over there, you were interacting with all the gadgets and technology, right? I feel like the whole song there was just to get Tenma to open his mouth and talk to him. Like, it was just strategic. He was like, I'm going to sing this song. I'm going to say a word wrong in it. And then I'm going to get Tenma to correct me. And that's going to spark conversation between us. It's rhetorical. It's classic persuasive techniques. It's so good. He does it so well. And Tenma kind of smiles in that moment like, yeah, you remind me of, like, it's a little reminder of home that Tenma hasn't thought of this entire time. He's like, and then there were the robots. Plastic models for my kid. He absolutely loved it. Where is your son now? And he's like, oh, he's dead. And he says that with such a smile. Like that point when he said my son's dead and he was smiling, I was like, oh, no, nothing Grimmer says we can take at face value anymore. Nope, off the table. Because that smile is hiding so much, right? So he says that he has a dead son. But he died after 1982. Which, again, could point to... But I don't know. I don't know how old his son was. And then, was he in Kinderheim or not? Would he have been too old? That part is unclear. And I don't want anybody confirming yes or no on that one. But... And that's when the guy comes to look at the passports. And I feel like Tenma was banking on the man looking at the passport and just being racist and thinking Tenma looked like every other Japanese man, but he doesn't. It doesn't work this time. And you can just tell the longer he stares, that's when Grimmer brings up the trout. He's like, oh, the Elba River. He's like, I wonder how the trout are doing this year. Like, and he's like, it's not very good. I feel like Grimmer's whole point in bringing up the trout story was to just throw off the guard so that he realized, oh, there's another person here. I don't want to look suspicious, so I'm just going to go get the other guards and leave you alone for now, which gave Grimmer the time to help Tenma escape. He's like, oh, it's not very good. And he's like, oh, I see. Last year I caught one about this big. And he's like, huh. He's like, I don't think you'd be able to this year. And he says, Dankeschön. And then Grimmer looks out the window like, okay, we got him to leave. I told him the story about the fish. The big fish story. Yes, the big fish. It's a lie. The phrase big fish, there's a movie about it. But the idea of the big fish is that it's a lie. It's not real. It's just something he made up. Like, I caught a whopper. I caught a fish this big. No, you didn't. And so in the moment he leaves and shuts the door, and then Tenma's just like, oh my God, like he breathes out the sigh of relief. And Grimmer's like, your secret's out. They're going to come and get you. They know your passport's a fake. God, I love Grimmer so much. I didn't think at this point in the series we'd be getting this new character, but I'm like, I freaking love him. And then he gets serious. He's like, you have to get out of here, Dr. Tenma. I'm like, his eyes and everything. I don't think he could be Johan's dad. I don't think so. I think he's too young. I think he's too young to be Johan's dad at this point, right? He looks like he's in his 40s. But I don't think he could be Johan's dad. Probably not. Although, Johan's only 20 or 21. And this guy is what, probably in his early 40s? Technically, he could be. Nah. Surely not. Surely he's not Johan's dad. Nah, Grimmer. Although Grimm's fairy tales. Nah, I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say if he turns out to be Johan's dad, we said it here first. But I don't think so. He says you should get out of here, Dr. Tenma. And he's like, the Border Patrol knows about your fake passport and they're gonna come for you. You need to get out of here. And so they help him for a brief second, I thought that he had Tenma in the bag, but that's completely unreasonable. I thought he was maybe lying. It was like this bodybuilder and was super buff underneath his shirt. But no. So they end up basically revealing that Tenma escaped the train, and so they put on the emergency brakes, and then Tenma gets out, but Grimmer finds him really easy. I'm like, how did Grimmer find him so easily? He's like, the train stopped, so I got off. And I'm sorry, but I've carried bags that are filled with books. They're freaking heavy. He's toting that one big duffel bag on top of his shoulder with one arm. He's a lot stronger than he looks. Ridiculously stronger than he looks. I'm getting Rosso vibes. I was saying Porco Rosso. I was like, it's a Ghibli film. Rosso vibes. I'm getting Rosso vibes from Grimmer. Like if he was a spy, if he's a freelance journalist that was a spy, that was an assassin maybe. I feel like there's way more to Grimmer, and I'm really, really excited. And Tim was like, what? And he's like, I can guide you to the border. I'm like, this is the first time you've supposedly been in Prague, but you know how to get to the border and back? Sure, Jan. Okay. Sure you do. Sure you do. And then he's smart enough to know, he says, oh, I come here to fish often. The climbing is a little difficult, but the scenery is a sight to be seen. And Tim is just like, do I believe you? And he's like, why are you helping me? And he says, oh, I worked at a newspaper back when there was an East and a West Germany. And although I'm a freelance journalist right now, I read all the articles about you. I'm very interested in you. Because he's talking about Johann, probably. There were false charges made all the time in East Germany. This political prisoner was falsely accused. That murderer was innocent. Seeing that all the time, I can identify real criminals from the ones who are falsely accused. And then he turns around, looks at Tenma, and says, you are innocent. Isn't that right, Dr. Tenma? And he tells him not to call him a doctor anymore. He says, but you're an excellent brain surgeon, aren't you? And he says, I'm not a doctor anymore. And Grimmer's like, okay, if you say so, sir. And so Grimmer's also really smart because he makes the deduction. He's like, if we go to the highest point here, we can see them. So if they trail us, we'll know for sure. And he's like, you only enter the border at night. So, I mean, he's been in these life or death situations before. And so he's a little bit more worldly in that regard than Tenma. And then he sets up, he's like, I've got wine and cheese. I brought my own spread. I love it. He's like, I don't have that much time. He's like, you can't go until it's nighttime. So yeah, he has the Dixie cups, a whole damn wedge of cheese. He came with he's got prosciutto and everything. Dude came prepared. I want to go on a picnic with him. So yeah. And he says, isn't this fun? It's good to have one occasionally. There are times that make you feel happy you're alive. And I respect doctors like you. So yeah, I feel like Grimmer, he talks about enjoying simple things because they make you feel alive. Very much like the taste of sugar, moment with Rosso. Very much a similar thing of you need to enjoy things and be happy that you're alive. And I feel like he's been in situations where that could have been called into question, right? And he talks about Tenma and how he respects doctors like him. And then with that, he says that journalists like me give people a little happiness if I write a good article. It's like a temporary fix, right? It's something very surface level. He's like, but you give people life itself. And then he brings his kid up again. He pauses and he doesn't open his eyes. And that's when Tenma says, I shot a man. And he's like, he's last month in Munich. I shot someone for the first time, which establishes to Grimmer that he didn't commit any of those prior murders. He is innocent there, but he did shoot a man now, and he feels bad about it. And Grimmer's just kind of like, And then he says, and he's probably dead. And then he talks about his hands stopping to tremble. And he says, from here on, there's another person I have to shoot. So I can't call myself a doctor anymore. And so they finish their thing. He says, whenever I come to Elba River to fish, I think to myself. And he says, I wish I could have come here fishing with my son. And so then Tim is like, oh, your dead son, right? The one that you keep bringing up. And he's like, I can catch trout this big here. He died without ever knowing the joy of fishing. And then he says, if a doctor like you were near him back then then his life would have been saved. So I don't know. I don't know. That just seems like, oh my God. So what if Johan's his kid? I don't know. But regardless, whether Johan's his kid or not, probably not. They don't really look that similar unless we see Johan and Nina's mom and they both look exactly like her, then all bets are off. But the point of it that's interesting is he talks about his son dying. We don't know. The son died from either an injury or a wound or something bad happened. It wasn't something natural that a doctor couldn't save, right? It wasn't like an illness. He didn't die from like a cancer or something because that would have been beyond Tenma's control. But he says if a doctor like you had been there, my kid could have been saved. So maybe his kid was shot. Again, Johan. Maybe his kid was shot. Maybe his kid was like wounded or stabbed or something like that. And the thing of it is, he says if Tenma had been there, he could have saved him. And the irony is Tenma has saved a lot of kids, and the one he's trying to shoot now is one of the ones that he saved. So I don't know. I don't want to say that it's Johan. I don't think it is. I'm like 5% thinking that it's Johan is Grimmer's kid. 5%, like not a lot, but it would be a wild twist. It would be a twist if that were the case. But I don't think so, right? He says lives would have been saved. I'm telling you, I caught a fish this big. And Tenma kind of smiles, like Grimmer's kind of like a clown a little bit. That he's like kind of a comedic clown, like he's making you laugh about it. But I'm like, it's a lie. I don't know what to believe with Grimmer. I believe that he has a good character. I believe that he has a strong sense of justice. I believe he's doing things for his own agenda to try to... I believe that he does think Tenma is innocent. I don't know if he knows about Johan or not. But as far as when he's like... As far as knowing him and being able to read him, he's an enigma. And I'm just obsessed already. I hope we see more of him. And it says, if you cross that mountain, you'll be at the Czech border. And so you can catch a ride there. And then he's like, I'm off to the station. If we meet again, let's have another picnic. And he says, Dr. Tenma, everyone is burdened with sins. So this is the part that's interesting where he tells Tenma, he says, everyone is burdened with sins. Okay? All right? And then from there he says, those sins will never disappear. But there are still things that you must do. He says they never go away, but you have to move forward. So I guess he doesn't tell him not to kill Johan, but he says, look, he's like, don't act like you're a saint. Everybody has committed a sin. He's like, they're going to burden us, but they shouldn't stop us from what we have to do, from what we need to do. So like in Grimmer's case, Grimmer's like, for all we know, Grimmer's an assassin that's killed 80 people. But he's like, regardless of what I've done in the past, there are things in the present I still have to do. Missions I still have to accomplish. There are things I have to do as a journalist, bring the truth to light that I have to go forward and do. You're a doctor. Regardless of the sins you've committed in the past, you still have an obligation to be a doctor, if that's what you must do. So don't let this stop you from being Dr. Tenma. I love it. I freaking love it. And Tenma just stares at him. And again, before when Tenma saw the girl and she's like, come back here, and he smiled at her, it seemed fake. But here he doesn't put on the fake smile. He actually seems to consider Grimmer's words, right? Just like, what is happening? And he, like, again, carries that duffel on one shoulder. And Tenma just kind of like doesn't say anything to what he tells him. And he just moves forward towards the border. And so then we see Prague, and it is beautiful. Like the cathedral, the lights, it's gorgeous. It's really, really pretty. And there's just like a lot of people around. And he says, wonderful. This is absolutely beautiful. This is the first time I've been here, but it seems like a town right out of a fairy tale at night. So yeah, I mean, he says it's the first time he's been there. So he's probably not Johan's dad. But he says it's the first time he's been there. So, but yet he manages to find that guy real quick, unless he told him to meet him there, right? because he sits down beside him and says, "Is this seat taken? Do you mind if I sit here?" And he knew who he was. That's the crazy thing. He says, "I'm totally in love with this place." He says, "You're Mr. Petrov, aren't you? You bought your Russian nationality and have been living in Czechoslovakia." He's a spy, but how did he know it was him? Was there a tip off? Did he get a tip off from a guy that Petrov was going to be there? Because he sees Petrov, and he was the director of Kinderheim 511. He was the director of the place with Johann in it, right? Whoa! But then what does he know? Okay. And there's something about the Union Bank on the paper. Interesting. He says, "I have something I want to ask you." And this time his eyes aren't closed, he's smiling. This time he's smiling, but his eyes are wide open. And it's very creepy. I'm like, oh, he's like, "There's something I want to ask you. Will you help me, Mr. Petrov?" Like he's so sincere sounding. He goes, "Or maybe I should call you Mr. Reinhard Bierman." Like he's just so nice about it, where I'm like, oh my God, that's terrifying. He says Reinhard Bierman. That's the part that gives me Johann vibes, which is another reason why I was like, you could totally be his dad, because he gives off this like soothing, kind vibe. He has that like optimistic spark that Tenma has, but then when he starts telling you these creepy things, you're like, oh shit, you're a lot more serious than you seem. And he says there was a special orphanage in East Berlin. It was experimenting ground for brainwashing young boys and changing their personalities. It was called Kinderheim 511. You were the director there. And that's when the paper lowers and you see his face. Again, we talk about names. Petrov changed his name from one thing to another, right? To like leave behind one identity and assume another. And Grimmer's like, "No, you were the director where they were brainwashing and changing the personalities of these kids." I think his kid was one of the ones there. I do. What if his kid was the one, I mean, he says his last name is Grimmer. So, but what if that kid that Richard shot was his son? We don't know. What if that was the case? He says, "You should know everything. You were the director there. What were you trying to do back there in East Berlin?" And then we see the place at Kinderheim 511. Yeah. Now the question is he going to talk or not? And we see all the kids in the photo. We don't see Johann in that one though. Oh man! So what are we gonna find out? What are we gonna get revealed? What are we gonna find out? What is Grimmer? Are we gonna find out what Grimmer discovers or not? Oh, I don't know. But I am 100% in love with Grimmer's character. I love him to pieces. He terrifies me in some ways because I can't read him, but he's so intriguing and just, he's so fascinating. I want to follow him. Like, here's my thing. Tenma's going through a sad sack moment, and I feel for Tenma. I do, but I'm like, you need to get yourself in gear, Tenma. And I don't mind if I follow Grimmer around for a while. He seems like a fun time. I want to learn more about him. So, I don't know, y'all. I don't know. But I can't wait to find out more, so, So, in the meantime, I hope y'all enjoyed this reaction discussion. I'm curious to know your thoughts down below, but I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon for episode 41 of Monster. Bye!